It's no longer news that France has lost its hold in the Sahel, and it's gradually losing its hold on the rest of the continent. While this is great news for Africans who have suffered under this influence and the system established by France, the authorities in France are not happy about this spectacular defeat. The very idea that their former colonies, which have been under their thumb for centuries, could break out is galling and embarrassing for France. This is not surprising given that France was only able to rise and maintain its position as one of the superpowers in the world because of its hold and influence in Africa. Certainly, they wouldn't want to let go completely without doing anything to attempt to regain that influence. Unfortunately for them, the die has been cast and things can never go back to the way it was before. The end of Françafrique is here. And, if you watch the news, it would seem that France's relationship with Africa has taken a backseat. Nobody is giving it any attention because the military juntas of the Sahel seat a serious blow to France. Right now, it's the U.S. relationship with Africa that is in the spotlight, with Niger kicking out the U.S. forces and Chad threatening to follow likewise. These changes in the Sahel, where African leaders are taking the sovereignty of their countries into their hands, have not gone down well with some people. The idea that one of the poorest countries in the world could kick out the military forces of two world superpowers in the space of 1 year has angered a former French military general, François Lecointre, causing him to come out to speak his mind on the issue. What he said was not shocking, but only buttressed the fact that Europe and the West are not friends of Africa. And any African leader that thinks otherwise is just foolish and greedy. General Lecointre, former Chief of Defense Staff, was once commander of the European Union training mission in Mali from January to July 2013. In 2019, after a UN report blamed French troops for killing 19 civilians in an airstrike on a wedding in Mali, Lecointre told the French newspaper Le Figaro that the report contained errors and signs of bias and was designed to turn local people against France. At the time, France had about 5,100 troops across the Sahel, where they were supposedly fighting militants tied to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State group. During the same interview, he stated that he believed Europe would still be fighting Islamist extremism in the Sahel in 10 years, and European forces would be more deeply involved than they are now. According to him, without such engagement, the Sahel would become a zone of chaos, with destabilizing illegal migration to Europe out of control. However, contrary to his belief, European forces were kicked out of Mali 2 years later, with similar actions occurring in Burkina Faso and Niger in 2022 and 2023 respectively. In response to the diminishing French presence in the Sahel, General Lecointre stated in an interview with the French newspaper Le Figaro that he fears that Europe is abandoning its responsibility to the African continent at a critical time. The Sahel, made up of countries such as Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, has been plagued by jihadist violence and political instability in states for more than a decade. This situation, combined with the rise in power of new actors like Russia and China, led the general to say that Europe must recommit its forces to the African continent to defend its interests. In his own words, what is our common destiny as Europeans is the Mediterranean and Africa, where our destiny is at stake. And so we have constantly tried, we French, to draw Europeans into this awareness of the need to act collectively in Africa and the Mediterranean. And I am absolutely sorry to see the failure of our commitments in the Sahel. General Lecointre further laments the failure of European commitments in the Sahel and emphasizes the need for a unified European approach to navigate a turbulent world. With potential shifts in U.S. foreign policy on the horizon, Lecointre argues that Europe must become capable of taking charge of its own destiny regarding military matters and the promotion of its values. According to the general, it is highly necessary and important that Europe act and interfere in Africa because the African continent struggles with state collapse, civil wars, and climate change. So, Europe is supposed to swoop in as a savior. He also added that Africa will experience a demographic explosion like no continent has ever experienced, and it will have consequences on Europe in the next 10 and 20 years. Hence the need for Europe to interfere militarily in the continent. The general ended by saying that Russia with its Wagner Group and China are not capable of offering lasting solutions to Africa's problems. The only people that can are Europe. In his own words, in 10 years or more, we must return and help these African countries to rebuild state structures, restore administrations, and foster development. This statement by the former French general highlights what might probably be France and Europe's plan of action for Africa in the next decade. African activist Nathalie Yam puts it simply in her tweet, in response to the general's statement. She wrote, "The former chief of staff of the French armies, General Lecointre, announces a military recolonization of Africa by France and Europe in the next 10 years. When we tell you that these people are our enemies, any African government in the area that claims to preserve the interest of its country and its populations must include in its program a complete break with France for at least 15 years. It's a question of survival." Indeed, it is a question of survival. Just think about the general's statement. He said that Africa is Europe's destiny to take charge of and control. And the only people that can solve Africa's problems are Europeans, not even Africans themselves, meaning he believes that Africa is incapable of self-governance. General Lecointre aims to position France and by extension Europe as the only savior of Africa, who can provide solutions to the challenges in the continent. Hence, he says Europe must return to Africa as soon as possible. His words echoes that of Erik Prince, a former U.S. Navy officer and founder of the American private military company Blackwater, who said in early February that Africa should be recolonized because its leaders are corrupt and selfish. In Erik's words, "It is time for us to just put the imperial hat back on to say we are going to govern those countries if you are incapable of governing yourself, because enough is enough." When he was asked if he was advocating for colonialism, without mincing words, and with so much confidence, Erik Prince said, "Absolutely yes. However, what these people seem to forget is that the Africa that they colonized centuries ago is not the Africa that exists today." General Lecointre says only Europe can solve Africa's problem, but in the centuries of colonization and decades after independence whereby France exercised control over African countries, what did Africa have to show for it? What benefits did Africa get? Did it stop insecurity? Did it build state structures and foster development? The answer is no. France and Europe were content with the state of Africa as poor and underdeveloped with bad governance, as long as their interest was protected. They even protected the bad government that the general is complaining about, as long as their interests are protected. But now that it seems like that interest is in danger and its influence has been reduced, it's now France that wants to talk about how it needs to foster development. This is highly hypocritical of France, and as African activist Nathalie Yam says, these people are not our friends. Nobody should be deceived by their talk of helping to rebuild state structures, restore administrations, and foster development, or colonizing Africa because Africans are suffering from bad governance. The fact is, it's all for their interests. China and Russia are far better partners to deal with because they do not hide under the notion of wanting to develop Africa. Their dealings with African countries are based on mutual benefits, as they should be. In response to the general's statement, Captain Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, issued a stern warning to those such as the general who plan to destroy the sovereignty of African countries. Speaking to his soldiers, he said they should prepare for a war of high intensity, not just against terrorism but against decolonization. He went further to say that some generals have made statements regarding the recolonization of the country with their armies, but he said that regardless of how they plan to come into the country either with their armies or using local spies, the Burkinabe army is ready to face them all. Without a doubt, with new leaders such as Ibrahim Traoré, General Tiani, and South Africa's Julius Malema, the recolonization of Africa by Europeans would not be possible. The authorities in Europe and the West understand that Africa's time has come. The next decade or two represent a significant period for the continent, and this is why every country, including France, is trying to maintain its influence in the continent. However, the caliber of leaders currently in charge is not like the previous ones who were weak and greedy. These leaders are ready to defend the sovereignty of their countries no matter the cost. This is indeed a great time for the continent, and we look forward to seeing how it will all play out. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video.